By the time you're done watching this presentation to the very end, you'll never have to wonder if you can completely satisfy any woman in the bedroom. Because in this video, you're going to get the tools to read any woman's sexual blueprint so that you can confidently get her turned on, make her come faster, harder, and longer than she ever has in her life, and even open her heart to you so that she'll feel authentically connected and devoted to you. Even if you already consider yourself pretty damn good in bed, this video is going to give you the tools to be great. And that's why I'm about to share secrets that give you the power to literally take control of a woman's sexual response so that you can literally drive pleasure into her body at will and give her orgasm after orgasm until she literally can't take anymore, which, as you might expect, is going to make her feel very, very nice things about you. Now, to lay some important groundwork for you, I'm going to share a very personal story that is pretty embarrassing. So I'm posting it for free online only as a test. Regardless of how you found out about it or what brought you to this page today, I just want to be clear that I may have to take it down as quickly as I put it up. So watch it now and watch it to the very end. And if I were you, I'd consider taking some notes because there very well may be a 404 not found page here in the very near future. So I was about halfway through freshman year in college. I guess that would make it 87. And it was early December before we went home for the holidays. So even though it was getting dark pretty early in the day, it was still pretty warm outside. I went to school in North Carolina. And I remember that night very clearly because on that particular night, I was getting laid. She was a friend of my roommate, and she'd invited me over for a glass of wine on a Friday night. Now, it's probably obvious to you that she'd invited me over for a bottle of wine on a weekend that her roommate just happened to be out of town because obviously she wanted to have sex, and I figured that. But at the time, I had no idea why she might have been interested in me because I knew I was ugly. I mean, I had a ton of evidence for that fact. So when I ended up in bed with a pretty girl like that in college, I was, frankly grateful. Anyway, we finished a couple of bottles of wine sitting on the rug between the beds of the dorm room on the floor. And we made out for a while, and then she took my hand and stood up and led me to the bed. Funny how you remember these details, that I got under the blanket before taking my pants off because I was still really insecure about the size of my penis, and I didn't want her to see it. So I slipped my pants off under the blanket. And when I started fumbling with the condom, the nightmare really began because I lost my erection. As soon as I started to unwrap it, I went limp. And of course, she noticed, and she's like, "What's wrong?" Which is not what you want to hear. So I kept trying, and it kept getting more limp and smaller and smaller. I was just too nervous to get it up. Back then, I'd never even heard of a guy having problems getting it up when he was nervous. Maybe it was just less talked about back then. In any case, I thought I must be the only guy in the world who was such a wuss that he couldn't get hard when he was in bed with a pretty girl. And trust me, I had very, very normal hormones. Now, to her credit, roommate's friend was incredibly patient and understanding for an 18-year-old girl. And eventually she suggested that we try it without the condom because she was on the pill. I almost resented not being off the hook because now I couldn't even blame the condom. I focused literally every bit of my mind and willpower onto getting myself turned on. I was freaking out. I imagined every girl that had ever turned me on in my entire life. I even tried fantasizing that I was back at home in my own dorm room jerking off. And finally, it got about halfway there, and I managed to wriggle the little semi-limp thing inside of her. And that's when you can guess what happened next. I'd worked so hard to get myself excited that the feeling of warm wetness inside of her made me come pretty much instantly the moment I got inside her. And I tried everything I could to stop it, but it was like trying to stop a freight train by stringing a ribbon of toilet paper across the tracks. And she had been so nice to me. She bought wine. She lit candles. She was really, really patient with all of my pathetic awkwardness. How could I ever face her again? I apologized over and over, and she, did that pretending like it was no big deal thing. I had it in my head that I might get it up again. I might redeem myself and last longer this time. But after about 30 minutes, I realized that I was just too nervous and it was never going to happen, and I was just further humiliating myself. So finally, I left her dorm room just before dawn. I walked slowly back to my quad, trying to figure out if there was any way my life could turn out to be anything but miserable, if I couldn't even ever have sex like a normal man. And I cringed as I realized that my roommate was going to hear about this. I mean, they were close friends from back home, and he'd probably ask her about it. I wondered who he might tell, who else she might tell. I mean, how many people on the campus were going to know about this? And so alone in the pre-dawn December chill, I sat down on the wet grass in the middle of the quad, and I cried my freaking eyes out. And sitting there in the wet, cold grass as the sky began to brighten, something shifted in me. I stood up, I shook the tears from my eyes, because that was the moment that I realized that, of course, I was never going to be great in bed just by accident. I wasn't going to grow up one day and discover that, like the ugly duckling, I was suddenly swan dude that all the chicks were hot for. And I could learn, I could practice, I could take responsibility for actually making a change in myself. I could decide what kind of man I wanted to become, and I could work for that. And I was going to get this sex thing handled. I slept a few hours, and then the first thing I did was I went to the gigantic campus library, which actually was the third largest in the country at the time. And to my surprise, there was an entire and huge section devoted to sexuality. I mean, literally probably 300 books, including quite a few of the classics of the sexual revolution, and the whole free love generation, where they were writing a lot of books like The Joy of Sex and the lesbian feminist classic Our Bodies, Ourselves, and several translations of the Kama Sutra. And I spent day after day locked in that library, and I read everything. I read Science and Anatomy. I read the poetry of Sappho and the literary smut of Henry Miller and the poems of Anais Nin. I read The Life of Casanova. I read about Dr. Ernst Grafenberg's discovery of the G-spot and about the psychoanalysis of deep-rooted sources of women's sexual fantasies. I read Masters and Johnson's sexual studies and the anatomy of the clitoris, and even discovered that there was something called performance anxiety, which explained exactly what had happened to me that night, and that it turned out to be pretty common. And I started having regular, in-depth, extremely graphic conversations with women about sex, what they liked, what they didn't like, what turned them on, and what ruined it for them. I stumbled almost immediately onto two insights from these conversations. One, girls love to talk about sex, and they will go on and on about every detail in the most graphic way all day long if you're just chill about it. And two, I learned the single most important thing there is to know about being great in bed. Something so simple that it's almost ridiculous, and twice as ridiculous, because as far as I could tell, nobody else in any of the hundreds of books I was reading seemed to know about it. And yes, I promise I will tell you exactly what that thing was before the end of this video. I was a man obsessed. And all of these conversations that I was having with the girls about sex, they began to have another result too. A lot more sexual opportunities, and even a few girlfriends. And in a very short time, I learned how to quickly, easily, and expertly give any woman intense orgasms at will. And today, in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to share with you exactly how you can do it too. Yet that is not the end of the story. There's a lot more to great sex than just giving a woman an orgasm. Let's not kid ourselves and think that something she can do twice as fast by using a vibrator makes us king for the day. The world is full of guys that thought they were great in bed because their girl always came during sex, and then couldn't figure out why she broke up with him. If you want to learn how to give any woman the most mind-melting and heart-opening sexual experiences of her life, then you will want to watch this video to the very end. The incredibly sad truth is, most men will go to their graves without ever experiencing this kind of sex. Period. Never. Because there are forces in our culture that literally make it impossible for most men to learn this stuff. This is the real reason why the vast majority of men have so much uncertainty, embarrassment, and frustration with their sex lives. And it's why only a shocking 1 in 7 women ever have an orgasm during intercourse, yet most couples have no idea that none of this is their fault. The fact is this: you've been lied to your entire life about sex and what makes a great lover. The brainwashing around sex begins when you're just a kid. By the time you're 12 and you're starting to get flooded with the hormones, you already know that your male sexuality is bad and wrong and something you should definitely be smart enough to know you have to hide and never mention. Let's face it, showing your penis in school, it's going to get you in big trouble. That sounds funny and it sounds obvious, but the fact is, as much as the media shows off breasts, I mean, everybody loves breasts. We're supposed to look at breasts. Women are supposed to be proud of their breasts. Everybody loves breasts. But this same media makes it really clear that men do not take off their pants and show their penises. Those things have to be kept hidden at all costs. The way the media shows it, women literally scream in terror if they accidentally see one, when the towel falls off. And frankly, long before you've hit the 7th grade, you've learned that expressing your natural male curiosity about women's bodies is wrong, shameful, and will get you into trouble if the adults find out. And that's just natural curiosity. Forget about your natural male desires. And on that blank slate of shame, here's what our culture writes on our very earliest impressions of what's expected from a man who wants to be a good lover. A huge cock and the stamina to bang away on a woman for hours. And even if you think you already know that this is really just a big fat lie, you're almost certainly also aware that it's still deeply carved somewhere in the back of your brain, like it is on all of us. And these are just a few of the factors that literally brainwash men from children to adulthood so that you end up struggling to consistently give women the kind of powerful, intimately connected sex that they crave. It's not something you've had any control over in the past because the deck was stacked against you before you even sat down to play at the table. And hang on, because there is still more bad news. Because the next thing that happens is a bunch of men's magazines and websites try to capitalize on all this dissatisfaction, and they hire women to write endless articles on what women really want in bed. And we men eat that shit up, because after all, if you want to know what women like in bed, ask a woman, right? The problem is, most of these self-professed experts are just telling you something that got them off, personally, their taste, and it may or may not work on the woman in your bed. Or they toe the old feminist line of, you need to slow down and give way more foreplay, which really just means that even they have no idea why sometimes they get off with a man and sometimes they don't. Yet none of this advice that they give is going to work on all women. None of it will work for any woman all the time, and none of it is going to keep a woman from getting bored or disinterested in sex with you, or starting to think about other men, and probably all three. And let's not blame the women for that, because chances are you get bored too. This is not what I want for you, and I know it's not what you desire for yourself. So let's talk about what does work. And let's dive into the 3 essential tips that will put you immediately on the track to being the best lover the woman in your bed has ever experienced. The most important tip I'm about to share with you instantly builds deep intimacy and makes a woman feel authentic sexual connection and sexual trust with you so that she can surrender into much, much more powerful orgasms. This gives her permission to open up her most secret sexual desires with you, and she'll feel like you are a sexual psychic who just intuitively knows exactly what most turns her on. In fact, I call it the sexual psychic technique, and I'll explain exactly how it works and why it makes her feel so much connection and trust with you, whether you're making love to your wife of many, many years or having sex with a woman for the very first time. And to do that, first I need to warn you about the wrong way to do this. It's the big mistake that virtually every man makes when he wants to be good in bed. And what's worse, it's what most women will tell you should do to be good in bed. Yet, in fact, even for the woman that tells you that this is what she wants, it kills sexual attraction and arousal faster than showing her how you learned how to chug a bottle of beer and then sing the entire alphabet in just one long burp. What is this arousal-killing mistake that probably every other guy she's ever been with has made? Well, it's tip number 1, and it's what you must never do. Asking her what she likes in bed. I actually had a famous female radio host grill me about this one. She was so offended that I would give such bad advice. After all, every women's magazine and talk show constantly have female sex experts yammering on and on about how they wish men would just be more open to just asking their woman about what turns her on and what pleases her. Why can't they just ask us? Why can't they just talk about it? And to be fair,